During the course of this, I will be talking to you about Benny. He is a 6-year, 2-month-old male who attends kindergarten in Fruitland Elementary School. I was given permission by his mother, my sister-in-law, for him to participate in this. For today's task number 1, conservation of number, we used pennies to denote how we were going to do this. And I gave myself 8 pennies and I gave Benny 8 pennies. He got to play with the pennies for a little bit, and then I put them in 2 very tight-knit groups. And I asked him if we both had the same amount of pennies. He looked at me and began to respond, and yes, we do. So I asked why, and he said because we both have 8 pennies. I then moved his stack of pennies into a long, drawn-out line and asked him the same question. I said, Benny, do we both have the same amount of pennies? And he looked at his line and my line, and he looked at me and he said, no, we do not. So I asked, who has more? And Benny said, I have more. I asked him why, and he said, well, because mine span more of the table. I said, okay, so Benny, can you count how many pennies you have? And he counted, and he figured he had 8 pennies. And then he counted mine, and I had 8 pennies, and he goes, we both have the same. And I said, yes, we do. So to conclude task 1, PJ's conservation of numbers, Benny has a good knowledge of this, and we moved on to the next task. For PJ's second conservation task, the conservation of length, I brought Benny 2 pieces of construction paper, 1 brown and 1 green, and asked him to play with them, look at them, put them on the table, pick them up. And as he did this, I explained to him, or asked him what length is, and he told me, yes, I know what length is. This is where something is long. And I said, okay, that's correct. To continue with this, I asked him if the 2 pieces of paper are the same length, and he said yes. I proceeded to ask him why, and he put the papers on the table, one on top of the other, and said because they're the same length, the brown one covers up the green one. I said okay. We then began to, I said, can you show me other ways that their papers are the same length? So he took them off and he laid them side by side on the table, lining the edges up. And this showed me that he did understand the concept of length. However, moving into the concept of distance, he did not quite grasp it, so we decided to cancel this part of the task. So moving on to task 3, conservation of substance, I had Benny look at 2 glasses full of colored water. I asked him if these glasses had the same amount of liquid in them, and he said no, which they did not. One was a little bit less full than the other. So I grabbed the rest of the colored water and I made them equal and asked him again, Benny, do these have the same amount of water in them? And he replied with yes. So moving on, I said, okay, now you know that these both have the same amount of water. I brought in a larger, wider glass and poured 1 glass of the colored liquid into the wider glass and proceeded to ask Benny the same question. I said, Benny, do these glasses now have the same amount of water? And Benny looked at me and he had a confused look at the beginning, and then he answered no. He said that the smaller thinner glass had more water than the larger, wider glass. I feel that this leads to Benny not quite grasping the theory. So I showed him and that when you pour the wider, larger glass into the smaller, narrower glass, they are the exact same. The size of the glass does not matter how much water is in it. Benny and I chose not to complete task number 4, conservation of mass and weight, because he did not grasp what mass and weight actually was in retrospect to this kid watching exercise. As with the task before, we decided to skip over the conservation of area. He did not understand what area was. I tried to explain it and it did not take hold. He was unable to have an understanding of what area is. Moving on to the task 6, conservation of weight. Benny got to play with the Play-Doh and rolled around in his hands before putting it into the receptacles of water. I will say that he does not have a good concept of weight and did not understand that if you flatten out one ball of Play-Doh and distribute the mass or weight of the object against the water, it will float rather than sink. So I conclude that he does not have a good understanding of mass and weight. Having concluded the Piaget's conservation tasks, we moved into the linguistic development, and Benny had brought in his favorite book called What Makes a Rainbow by Betty Ann Schwartz. In this book, Little Rabbit goes on a trip through the woods to meet all of his friends who correlate to a color in the rainbow. His friends then tell Little Rabbit what he needs and what colors they need to make a rainbow. Benny picked up this book and with enthusiasm began to read, having very few miscues. I believe I counted maybe 3 total, and I could tell from further observation that Benny had read this book multiple times and seemed to be reading it from memory rather than actual reading the words. Either way, he showed a great deal of enthusiasm while he was reading, and he could understand the story and was able to tell me about each character and what they represented in the story at the end of the book. In part 2 of the linguistic development reading portion, I had Benny read a book called Just a Big Storm by Mercer Mays, part of the Little Critters series. This tended to be a little bit more of a problem for him. During this reading, he had never seen this book and was never exposed to these characters, so it gave him a little bit more of a problem. There were several miscues per page, but he did show the ability to try to read and sound out words, and with praise and help he was able to finish the book, and you could tell he was very proud about reading a book that he had never read before. As we moved into the linguistic development writing portion of the Kid Watching project, I told Benny that he was going to get to write a story for me. He was very excited about this and proceeded to ask, well, what do I get to write about? And I told him it was up to him. He could write about whatever he wanted, and I wouldn't bother him, and when he was done he could come give me the story back. The story consisted of the Cat in the Hat, and I believe that he wrote about the Cat in the Hat because it just happened to be on the TV in the background, and that probably helped aid his imagination. Upon getting the story back from Benny, he showed a growing knowledge of writing. He was using the proper capitalization at the beginning of sentences. He used a title at the beginning of the story, as you can see in the picture, and he tried to use his best handwriting during the course of the story, but he did use proper sentences and had full thoughts during the course of the story. I would say he is in the learning process. He is only a kindergartner, and it does show, but he is on his way to becoming a good writer if he is taught and encouraged. To close out the KidWatching project, I had Benny draw a picture. I told him it could be whatever he wanted. He had an unlimited amount of time or resources. At my house currently, I did not have too many artistic resources. I think I had some paper and some pencils. I couldn't find him any crayons or anything like that. So he took a piece of paper and a pencil and drew what you see on the screen today. It is a picture of his family, his mom and his dad, and a bunch of his friends. And as he was drawing this, he would show me each person and explain to me who they were and how they interacted with him on a daily basis, and he was very proud. This showed a great deal of emotional cognizance. He was very aware of his own feelings, what made him happy and sad. He was also aware of my feelings throughout this whole KidWatching project, and ultimately he enjoyed participating, and I enjoyed having him participate. And that concludes my KidWatching presentation. Thank you.